Let's get started without further ado. So, welcome everyone, welcome. My name is Angus Mackay. I'm joined here with recent Winner Duel winner, Chifley. Chifley, how are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, guilty as charged. I was victorious on the weekend. So,
And how was it? What was your, how did you feel your deck went? Firstly, I guess, what were you playing? Why did you decide to play it? And how did it go?
so I was playing Reanimator, and I decided to play it mostly because it's gained a couple of like really important cards in the last set with the the Fanatic, the Miracle
Yes.
Creature,
Yeah.
and Valgavoth. And I also thought it's pretty well positioned against Mardu. And luckily, I played against Mardu 3 times over the course of a relatively small event. So that kind of worked out well. Yeah. And
Yeah.
the deck certainly behaved for me.
Yeah, that's nice. It's like sometimes it can be so frustrating when you take like you know it to be a high variance deck, but you're like on the right side of variance and you're going the whole way and you're like, yes, 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 it's happening. And then like something can happen at the end and it's just like because the cards fell in the wrong way. But I guess that's just the cross you have to bear
Yeah. I mean,
playing a
you always
pro
have to
deck.
top deck a little bit to win. And I top decked the right times for sure. So,
Yeah, it's really good. If you are in the chat, welcome, welcome. You can find us at. I wonder what would happen if the brawl event paid out on top 8. Yeah, it's interesting to see the difference between what happens when people play it out and what happens when people don't. It definitely like I think it's better information and it's making me more inclined to do so in the future. If you're watching us later, you're watching us at youtube.com/cbrmtg. Um, and if you are watching us right now, you're watching us on twitch.tv/cbrmtg. If you've stumbled upon us and you don't know what's happening, it's because you are in the greatest format in Australia. That's the Australian 7-point Highlander. And you can find more information at 7pointhighlander.com.au. So Chifley, you were there. You took it all the way down to the end. Stiletto in the chat mentions, would you have considered splitting, or were you 100% in for the top 8?
yeah, I was always going to play it out. I'm not sure how you would split a duel anyway. Seems inconvenient. You might as well let it ride.
Yeah, yeah, and we've seen that with you, of course, before in the past, coming second at Worlds, if I'm not mistaken, with an initiative deck. So very interesting to see you back, see you in the hot seat. Congratulations on the win. Let's have a look at here. But I mean, Chifley, you've gone through this presentation just as much as I have at this point. Why don't you break us down what we see on the page and introduce us to PoG WAD Melbourne?
Yeah. So we've got the decks here that had more than 3 copies in the field. There's actually a fair selection of decks that showed up with multiple players. Interestingly, 3 is apparently the number of players you'd see playing a deck. And then we've got the win share is the record's better than 3, 2, and 1 because it was a 6-round event. And then what percentage of the winning decks came from each archetype. So I think it's really useful to see, over the course of the event, does a deck improve its share of the metagame, or does it drop off?
Yeah. And I think something really interesting that we have noticed through this is down the bottom, other decks 27. So 28 are the ones above, and then 27 were just a smattering of other stuff, which is like, I think it's a good important metric to look at because and we spruik this a lot in events throughout the years, is that Highlander is not 30% of the meta share like standard or even legacy, where you're like 20% is this deck and 20% is this deck. Like, I think it's a point of pride to say that the highest deck that is seeing the most amount of play is still only 12%. So it's like maybe it's a dice roll that you would see Grixis midrange in the room in the entire event. So I think that that's helpful. I think a lot of people might have experienced multiple matchups over time. I think something that you pointed out before that is really interesting is comparing the metagame share with the win game share. So you can see Grixis like 12% of the field, 15% of the winning decks. And so those ones performing well, if you perform higher than your meta share, that's good. That's mean on average your deck performed well. Eldrazi about the same. Grixis Thoracle about double, which is a good showing. And then as you see down the bottom, Reanimator at a 15% of the win share, but only 5% of the meta. So, and I mean, same as Jeskai Midrange and Grixis Midrange, I suppose. But it's like interesting to see how those win rates sort of compare against it. And I mean, it's a little bit damning, I suppose, and something that we spoke about, Chifley, is the win share of the other decks. Presumably, the other decks sort of represent the Brewers' nature of the format, that there is no tier 1, tier 2, and like maybe these tiers are like somewhat established, but you can still win an event with any other slew of decks. You know, top 8 had mono blue, top 19 had mono blue, so it's like, you know, you can still bring kind of a rogue deck to the field. But the fact that it was 45% of the metagame share, but only 15% of the win share, a little bit damning, perhaps.
Yeah, and 7 Point Highlander is definitely a format that has a lot of capacity for brewing, because you've got obviously this incredibly huge card pool, and on a relative sense, not that many events and not that many deck dumps compared to, you know, certainly standard or modern, but even like other less competitive formats like Pauper, you're still going to have a huge amount of data to look at. So it is a little bit surprising to me how few of the winners' share came from what like singleton decks or decks that only a couple of people play. And I wonder if that's, you know, a quirk of this event or a quirk of the current metagame, or if this is actually, you know, I haven't looked at this specific number before for previous events. You know, it'd be interesting to look at something like Nationals, where we had that huge event size, and see if we see similar numbers when you kind of break it down to rare decks versus quote unquote meta decks.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's going to be, and this is going to be a recurring theme throughout the day as well, is that this is a very Melbourne meta. You know, the Stompy decks, like, they didn't really perform very well, although they're popular. Like, they've kind of moved away from what you've played in the past, which I would sort of title as like turbo initiative, where your only goal is to put as many initiative creatures on the battlefield as possible. A lot of those initiative decks have kind of moved towards like either a light splash and you're playing Mardu or Jund, or even Naya, but they're really not present in this room. And the Stompy decks kind of reflect that as well. But when we were watching the stream, it was like Grixis versus Flash Hulk, and then Omnath Walks versus Lurus Breach, and I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what I expect from Melbourne.
Yeah, look, I mean, speaking personally, I obviously thought about initiative given my history with the deck, but I think that one of the key factors for me is that Psychic Frog is a real problem to beat with initiative. Like, it's a 2-point evasive threat that's very hard to remove, and one of the best things against initiative is cheap evasive threats. So expecting to see a fair number of frogs in the field was a big reason for me personally not wanting to register initiative. So could be other people making similar kind of decisions for sure.
Yeah, it seems like it. It's interesting. Moving on now, we're going to the most played points and the most points spent. So we've done this a couple of times, and also it's present on Vi's breakdown as well. Volty Gamer has done like a sort of 10-minute breakdown, and she's more involved with the cards. We're going to deep dive into archetypes and stuff, but this is present on both of them. So if you have a chance to see Volties, it's good, comes out early, 10 minutes, and it also comes with the article as well. So you can check that out over at 7pointhighlander.com.au. Chifley, anything to point out here? Anything interesting about the most played points in the event and their meta share?
I would say this is pretty consistent with what we saw a couple of weeks ago with Canberra. You know, a lot of the same cards. It's interesting to note how many cards have been pointed in the last, say, 6 months or year that are still showing up being heavily played. You know, like clearly White Plume Adventurer, Broadside Bombardiers, these are cards that are absolutely worth the point. They deserve the points they got.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't see anything here that's particularly outlandish. I mean, Fourth Aerolangus, Force of Will has been at the top of the ladder, and Broadside Bombardiers is sort of nestling itself into it, which is probably a good reason to say that it was worth the pointing at the time because Broadside Bombardier is very powerful, but people really like it. Obviously, it's still seeing a lot of play. Um, yeah, yeah, not too much outside of the usual. It's nice to see on the point by descending. Lutri's still like getting up there. Like that was one of the recent pointings as well. Lutri as a companion to 3 points, but still the third. Like when we're talking about points by, it's like the value of a point. And so a lot of people decided that spending 3 points on a Lutri was a good idea as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and did well with it too. So
Yeah, yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
no doubt at all. On the other side of the coin, we have the least played pointed cards. I think there's a little bit of Melbourne bias in here. I think there's a little bit of starter set bias as well. Like I think a lot of the time we see ones and twos like spattered in there for like a 100-person event. And most of this would be filled out. I think it's like pretty rare that you have such a big list of zeros.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? Anything to call out?
Yeah, well, I think particularly with the pieces of power that you're seeing here, like that's something where you really need the larger events before you can expect to start seeing some of those showing up. It isn't necessarily indicative of them being underpointed. But yeah, Underbound Adventure at 0 is perhaps a little bit surprising, given we're still seeing so many copies of White Plume and Seasoned Engineer, and Caves of Chaos Adventure is also, a popular point spend. It's a little surprising to see that at 0 myself.
Yeah.
And in the opposite way, honestly, seeing 2 Library of Alexandrias, even though it's on this least spent list, this is pretty surprising.
Yeah, I think there's everyone who owns a Library of Alexandria is now testing to see if they can get data for us, and obviously we appreciate that to see anyone bring Library of Alexandria. But yeah, Mouse brought it to Cambrawl and was the only Library of Alexandria player. 2 people brave enough to bring it today. It could be interesting. It could lead to some interesting results as to the power of decks that would want to play Library of Alexandria. Probably the only other thing to call out, Undermountain Adventurer hasn't seen that much, doesn't feel like it sees that much play, but it's got to be the next tier from Caves of Chaos Adventurer. Like I think White Plume and Seasoned Engineer, we always see at the top of the list. Everyone loves those 2 cards, and 3 points for both of them. Caves of Chaos, kind of. But honestly, I think the thing about Undermountain Adventurer is that by being a 3/4 with Vigilance, it's promoting blocking, but a lot of the decks that want to play initiative creatures want to attack. So I'm wondering if that's like where this sort of situation happens.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of thought Underbound Adventurer was undervalued as an initiative threat, mostly because there was no second 4-cost green initiative creature. Because in a lot of ways, in one specific way, having the 4th point of toughness, it was better than Caves of Chaos Adventurer.
Yeah.
Not being exposed to Lightning Bolt is a huge deal for your initiative threat.
That's true.
So there might be just some color bias going on here, and Red gained key cards from Modern Horizons 3, where I'm not sure Green has picked up much of note.
No, it doesn't seem to be that way. Moving on. Now we've got the most played points. So on the left column is, of course, the name of the card. In the middle is how many we saw in the top 8. And the one that we have on the right-hand side is just your conversion rate. So how many Force of Wills were played in the event versus how many were played in the top 8. So I think in everyone taking all the variables out, you have about a 13% chance, I think, of making top 8. So we use this sort of as an idea of like if your conversion rate is higher than 13%, which is like the likelihood of you getting into top 8, then it's a good conversion rate. But it's nice to see. I mean, Reanimate had a good conversion rate because most of the people who played with it did well. And yeah, I mean, Intuition, an interesting one. Anything here else to call out, Chifley, or is anything surprising to you here?
I wouldn't say there's much that's surprising about this list. I think it's kind of one of the strange things that happens, like when you're looking at the card like Force of Will that was played the most, is for it to have a high conversion rate comparable with a card like Intuition or a card like Dreadhorde Arcanist on this list, you would need to have, I think, over 8 copies in the top 8, which obviously doesn't make sense. So you do have to put a little bit of context on these numbers when you're thinking about it. I'm surprised Dreadhorde Arcanist has dropped off so much. That was like really a key card for Grixis for a long time, and one of the things that it has gained is a little bit of synergy with Arena of Glory. If you can make that work with your mana base, like giving that creature haste is a big deal. So maybe there's some more exploration to be had there.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on, here's our recent points changes. So I've also per capita or whatever have said whether or not the percentage has gone up or down from Cambrawl. So it's obviously averaged out so that you can tell, but it just gives you kind of an idea of how many copies were played in the event since the recent points changes and whether or not that number's going up and down. One thing that I think is just important to point out is that a little bit of like difference between maybe a difference between Canberra and Melbourne. The fact that like Broadside Bombardiers was really present in Melbourne, still present in the overall, but maybe less so. And Nadu was relatively unplayed in Canberra, but saw a lot of play in Melbourne. So I think some of these are like state differences, but yeah, Bolas's Citadel, Flage, Psychic Frog, all up in percentages per capita from Cambrawl, and I think that's a little bit of like trying to test the limits of those cards on the watch list.
Yeah, and another hidden factor is that the event in Melbourne on the weekend was the same week as Worlds, and a couple of strong Melbourne Magic players were at Worlds who I think would have been a fair chance to play Bus Stop Grixis.
Yeah.
So that Lutri number, if you add another 2 to it, maybe that arrow is pointing up in the trend ways with how small the event size was. So there's definitely some factors beyond just deck choice, some circumstantial factors.
Definitely. Strip Mine again, last point that I want to make about this is Strip Mine again showing that maybe it was actually okay to put down to a point. Like, it's so wild to think of it as the same points as Wasteland, and because it's a strictly better card, but it's like if you I just can have such trouble thinking of what deck would just want to play Wasteland and not play Strip Mine anyway. So it kind of feels to me like it's depointing of those decks in total because, I don't know, aggro decks, stompy decks, they don't really just play Wasteland as their last point. I don't know, from my experience, what do you think, Chifley, is a point out?
Well, I always kind of thought of Wasteland as being a pair with Ren and 6 as well too.
Yeah.
And now that Ren and 6 has moved up to 2, that kind of, you've freed that point back up again now by moving Strip Mine down to 1, because you've still got this kind of overall 4-point package if you're trying to build some kind of recursive land destruction in your deck there. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on. Outside of the points, we're now looking at the most played non-lands in the event. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but this list always looks the same to me. I think it's nice to see Tamiyo. Tamiyo seems to be moving up, but we're always seeing Misstep. We're always seeing Brainstorm, Lightning Bolt, Fable now, Swords, Thoughtseize. Like, this is just maybe just a starter kit if you are getting into the format for what cards you should start off by buying.
Yeah, I mean, if you fill your deck with a bunch of one-cost interactive pieces and a bunch of powerful selection in your one-cost cantrips, you're going to be in a great spot. And then all these cards boost each other up in terms of win rate, like Lightning Bolt and Swords to Plowshares and Fatal Push and Brainstorm are all lifting each other up.
Yeah. Nothing here that's too outlandish. We're still seeing a lot of people playing one Mishra's Bauble, but not the second one. I've heard a lot of people spruik playing both.
Yeah, I personally would strongly advise playing the second one. It's surprising to me that you would decide the line of playability between, your first zero cost cantrip or your second zero cost cantrip, really, because you've already got Gitaxian Probe. And the third one would be that small amount of Scry 1. I mean, we're not seeing anybody playing Opt, which shows you don't really care about Scry 1, draw a card.
Totally.
What we care about is that this costs 0 and that it has the artifact subtype for our Goifs.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
more Goifs now than ever, too. So I definitely think Urza's Baubles underplayed.
Yeah, we'll see if that changes over time. As you said, the new Goifs are well and truly in play. I've seen more Pyro Goifs than I thought I would when when that card came out, but apparently it's quite good.
Yeah, it's a house.
Yeah. Let's move on to Archetype Distribution. So this graph will get better as time goes on. We're still sort of building what we want this template to look like, and then hopefully in the future we can just copy and paste it into a new template, and then that means we'll start getting historical data, which is the fourth dimension of data, and allows us to sort of check how archetypes are moving over time. I think something to call out here, of course, is just mid-range is up. I think mid-range is always up, and a little bit is like how we prescribe names to decks, which is the course of lots of discussion. But a lot of it is also just cards get good. Cards are getting good lately.
Yeah, and it's also got a decently high floor in some ways. Like, it's hard to build a mid-range deck that's going to collapse on itself. You can easily make some mistakes if you're trying to brew, combo, or control and end up in a really bad spot.
Yeah.
But when you're just putting a bunch of generically good, solid Magic cards into a mid-range deck, you're going to start from a decent spot.
Yeah, I think so too. Not much to say about this unless there's anything that you wanted to call out, Chifley, but color distribution, kind of in the middle. Red has the highest portion. I think that was the same. Red was the winner from Canberra 4 as well, but we can also measure this over time.
Yeah, this is probably just, to me, speaks a little bit about MH3 not really giving green much to be excited about.
Yeah, it's a fair assumption. So let's go into each individual deck. Topic of much discussion. From now until the end of November, I've opened a thread in Discord, and you can come in and give your ideas about the archetype wheel that sort of pulled out and dusted off from 2021 to just give an idea about what decks can you build in Highlander and what do those look like. So yeah, that's open. Check it out in the Discord. But for now, this is how we're dividing decks. We're dividing them into mid-range. Stompy is going to be an aggro, Tempo's an aggro as well. But for here, we can look at what we see as mid-range decks. 37% of the total meta, so just over a third, but 47% win share. So I think that might have been one of the big winners of the day, was that mid-range did quite well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I keep harping on this, but like MH3 had a lot of great cards for whatever strategy of mid-range you want to play, whether it was one of the ones that's leaning heavily on the Mardu wedge or whether it's Grixis. There's great cards in MH3 that you can play.
But even I think we have seen a lot of like Abhorrent Oculus and some other cards that I can't think of, but there's cards also in standard sets that are also sort of leaking their way in. So I think, yeah, it's just good cards are getting good. 4 in the top 8, 47% of the 19 winners for the day were mid-range decks. So yeah, just a big meta share, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Probably, yeah, not much else to say. I mean, you saw it on the screen as well, but 5 of the Grixis decks were playing Lutri, something to consider, I suppose, and 2 of the Omnath decks were playing Nadu. So it's interesting to see how Omnath Walks has kind of been moving. If you're playing Nadu, your points are like strictly locked, because you have to play Spellseeker, you have to play Time Walk, and you have to play Nadu. So it's interesting to see how people are moving around that.
Yeah, what's interesting, specifically just to those 2 Nadu lists, was that they were running Nomad's End Core as the key enabler. They seem to have moved away from one of the pieces of equipment that you could fetch with Stoneforge and have been experimenting with the Encore. So
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you're playing Eladamri's Call and stuff as well, so maybe it's better to just keep with the creature tutors.
Yeah, exactly.
Moving on, combo decks, 20.7% of the total meta, 31.6% win share. So that's actually a good showing. They did better than they didn't do. You can see the combo decks, 3 in the top 8 as well, which is pretty nice. Don't think I've seen 3 combo decks in the top 8 for a long time. What do you see here, Chifley? Anything to call out?
I think this is a reflection of people trying to take advantage of mid-range a little bit. I know certainly I was thinking about Mardu with my deck choice, and then when you see combo doing well like this, it was kind of the right weekend for it.
Yeah, yeah. You're trying
Not
to thread
any
the needle
specific
sometime.
one combo stands out as like having broken it.
Mm.
More just like it was a good weekend to bring combo.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the Grix historical decks are really sort of like they can kind of like dance on that line between like bus stop or like Grixis mid-range and combo because it's a very low package that you have to put in your deck to make it happen. So it's interesting. Yeah, I think Thoracle is going to be something to look out for. Me, as also a reanimator player, extremely proud to see 2 gorgeous reanimators in the top 8 as well. Just reanimator decks playing World Gorger Dragon. Yeah, it's a great showing. So it's good to see. Good to see.
Definitely.
Moving on, 8 control decks. This was probably our loser for the day. 5.3% of the win share, so 5.3% of the top 19 decks were control. And yeah, so 3 Jeskai sort of control-y decks. One's leaning on Miracles, one's leaning on Initiative. 2 Blue Moon decks, and then a couple of lands decks on the side. So yeah, doesn't look too good. Although I have seen a lot of people playing Jeskai and also playing Miracles lately, hoping that it's time to thread the needle, but with control instead of combo.
Yeah, this to me speaks to the difficulty you have staying on top of how powerful threats are now.
Mm.
You're fighting an uphill battle in a lot of ways, and kind of like the evolution of control in some senses is to go towards that Grixis Lutri place where you've got a lot of the similar controlling tools, but you're pairing them with some very efficient threats,
Yeah,
like the Oculus. So
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what this says to me.
Yeah, me too, me too. Um, so now this is kind of more contentious, I suppose, sometimes when we have these conversations, but we've decided at the moment that, and this lines up with how MTG Top 8 sort of characterizes decks, but Stompy decks, to me, requires fast mana. I don't consider a mid-range deck I don't consider a deck a mid-range deck if they're playing like 3 or 4 pieces of fast mana that have a downside. If I see an Elvish Spirit Guide, if I see a Simmons Spirit Guide, I'm like, well, you're not concentrating on power, concentrating on value, you're concentrating on power. Does that sort of align with your understanding, Chifley? Does this sort
Yeah, I
of...
mean, it's obviously there's a spectrum, like if you look at a Manu mid-range list and they've got just the City of Traders, everything is you have to make the decision and draw the line somewhere, and I don't envy you for being the one categorizing it. But
Mm,
yeah, certainly I think there is definitely a distinction to be had between, Manu Initiative that's playing Ancient Tomb or Dark Ritual or City of Traders and the mid-range shells that really are only interested in lands that tap for 1 and cards that actually
yeah.
directly impact the board.
Yeah, and I think we're all going to get really excited about the fact that Initiative can be a mid-range deck, and it can be a control deck, and it can be a combo deck. It can be Stompy. But yeah, it's where we are seeing the evolution of Initiative as it happens in front of us, and I don't know. I'm actually really okay with Initiative as like an archetype, like a specific, like I'm trying to abuse the initiative mechanic. I'm like totally okay with it existing in Highlander. I don't think there's many other places to play it in the same way that we play it now.
Yeah, and maybe this is something people could have been doing 6 months ago,
Mm,
like playing a White Plume Adventurer and a Seasoned Dungeoneer and nothing else. Or one of the things that really John could have been doing at the start of the year when it was having some success and could have been playing a single copy of Undermountain Adventurer.
totally.
Like it was 0 points and it seems like it would have actually fit really well in that shell,
Hmm.
but we just weren't seeing it. So maybe this is something that people were sleeping on a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, perhaps. Probably a good winner, actually. Um, is the tempo decks. We see this up the top. Aggro decks did pretty poorly overall, but I think most of that was actually Stompy, and I think a little bit of that is because people are getting used to Initiative. They are getting used to Stompy. Maybe it was a bad time to bring Stompy, but you see it's 75% of the aggro decks that were played in the room. It was 27% of all the decks in the room, but it only made up 5.3% of the win share, which is terrible. Conversely, tempo decks, 2 of the 3 of these decks made top 19. So it's like I mean, we have to make concessions to the fact that the data is, it's better when there's more. But in a 58-person event, seeing tempo decks still having that nice high win share, and we saw Nathan Widdop was playing a tempo deck in Canberra 4 and made top 8. So, you know, if piloted well, if enjoyed, if you're good at it, you've been playing it a long time, maybe it is an okay time to sleeve it up.
Yeah, definitely. And spending, like, building your game plan around putting the initiative into play, like, you know, we're seeing five of the decks on the left there were trying to do that. And then getting paired into a Mardu player who isn't doing the same thing but can take the initiative back with the seasoned Dungeoneer they're playing anyway.
Yeah.
That's a really bad spot to be in
Absolutely.
for those dedicated initiative decks. So that I think explains some of their lost win share here.
Yeah. I would agree. My favorite part of the day, measuring the success of 8-point lists. I think we might be entering our second year of the accessibility rule coming into play, saying that if you play no reserved list cards in your deck, you can play an extra point. So these decks have been lovingly called 8 points. So if you are playing an 8-point list, and if you're not playing reserve list cards, because we did notice one deck was not playing 8 points, was playing 7 points, but could have played 8 points.
Yeah,
which
floating
is kind
a
of
point.
interesting.
Bit of a stunt there.
Yeah, a bit. Yeah.
But yeah, this is I mean, this is clear evidence to me that the accessibility rule is working. You know, we're seeing a lot of people are taking advantage of it, and B, you know, you can see they're doing well. You know, there's no indication that you can't win or you can't come close to winning with an 8-point deck, and there's also an absolute wide variety of archetypes that are taking advantage of the rule as well. It's not like, oh, it's only mono red that does it, or it's only 2 color decks that do it. There's heaps of space to build within the 8-point rule.
Yeah, I think that's it's really heartening. And of course, 31% of the total meta, 26% of the win share, which is great. Honestly, that's like a pretty good outcome. You know, if you're pretty close, being like as close as you can, I guess, to your representation in the total meta as having that win rate, that's like standard. So it's not, I mean, you have a little bit of like new player bias because, you know, if you come into the format, 8 points a great way to start. So you got like a little bit of new player bias taking action here. But I mean, it's great. We see 5 in the top 8. Sorry, 5 in the top 19, 1 in the top 8. Yeah, you're absolutely right that this is not like, this is not hampering your playability at all.
Yeah, good point.
Not much to talk about here. It's just good to call out every now and then. It's just how people are playing their 8-point lists. Not much to say here. Most people are enjoying 3 colors, with the other third in, or the other nearly quarter is 1 color and 2 colors. So I think at Canberra we had, it was more split. Like some people were trying 4-point lists, 4 color lists. And the only consideration I think is that Surveyor lands have made it a little bit better, but
Yeah,
you
definitely.
do take a lot of damage the more colors you add to your 8-point list.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Surveyor lands. It's been a big factor for the rise in the 8-point list. The Surveyor lands are so good, so it makes total sense.
Yeah, and I find myself honestly playing them, like fetching them out first. You know, like if I have a Consider in my hand, like why the hell am I just not fetching out an Undercity Sewers? You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to cap us off, we're reaching sort of the pointy end of the stream. Top 8 finishes in the last 6 events. We added our 2 Grixis lists to there, so Grixis Midrange. Some of it is actually just the Bus Stop Gang, which is you know, our pride and joy in Canberra. Team that likes to bring it to every event. So, but Turbo Initiative didn't see too much of it. today or lately, but it did have that big rise around the time around Worlds, around those last few events. And then what's really heartening again is like the other side, the right hand side, that shows that there are also 5, 9, 10 decks that were in the top 8 of the last 6 events that were just random decks. So it's a nice split.
Yeah, and some of these decks, there's been I think a couple of point changes, between that first or that oldest event we've got there on the list and the most recent one. So, something like Turbo Initiative, we probably might not expect too many more added to that 8 total there, or
Yeah.
that's about the only one that actually strikes out as to me as one where that archetype has probably been shelved a little bit, but yeah, it's definitely a lot of different archetypes here.
Yeah, it's good to see. In regards to what's next, moving on into the future, next week, the 8th of November, is the ANZ Super Series. Chifley, will we be seeing your wonderful face there?
No, I'm not qualified for the RC, and I'm not flying up to just play Highlander or to
Unreal.
grind, actually, but that's such an exciting event. I've been so glad to see Glenn continuing to put up big prizes on that Friday RC Highlander event. It's so great. Like a Time Vault we had at the last one, a Mox Emerald we had at the start of the year. Like these are like really big prizes available for playing 7-point Highlander as a lead-in side event. This is great to see. I love it.
Yeah, it's really good. Catch us there. I rented a van, and the 12 of us are going to. We have a shared playlist. We're gonna scare everyone coming in with our Canberra CBR MTG merchandise. So I won't have the fortunate ability to scare you on the day, but perhaps next time.
Putting the bus in the bus stop.
So next is the points announcement that comes out the week after. And then, as you mentioned, our Good Game store in Canberra has also just released a winner duel. So we see on the left-hand side on the recent events, it's been very Vic focused, and I think that's normal. I think Victoria really likes their Highlander, and it's really good to see that constant support. But yeah, happy and excited to add a couple of ACTs on there, including the National Highlander Championships on that end of the January weekend.
Yeah, and that the one before that where you've got that double header weekend with the teams trios. Highlander teams trios is an absolute delight to play.
Nice.
It's such an interesting twist on Highlander where it's not drastically different decks, but you do have to think about it a little bit, and then you get to play Team Magic, which is just unsurpassed for enjoyment.
Oh, it's fun.
Very excited about that one.
Yeah, we flew up for the last 2, flew down for the last 2, and it's unreal. It's just fun. It feels like a little party game because you also like you test together and you like tweak each other's decks, and really highly recommend it. The team trios, and then single player Sunday. So it's good to do your like fun team sort of party game version of Highlander, and then the serious one the next day. So we'll very likely be there for that one as well. Looking forward to it. Very nice. So I mean, we'll open just the floor for 5 or 10 minutes if people are interested. If they have any questions or any comments. We've been working really hard to define what is really difficult to define, which is a singleton format. And we really rely on individual players to also name their decks because not many people know your deck better than you do. I'm going to have a little go. We're going to have a little go when we're reviewing it. But most of that strength can come to you. Comes from the individual player putting in their name on their deck list. Is there anything, Chifley, that you wanted to point out before we wrap up or before we leave room for questions?
I thought, why not look at that question we got a while ago that I think we missed about newer cards being more liked than others. If I had to guess, I would say it's the opposite. I think people generally have negative reactions to a lot of the newer cards. But
you got to play.
Once you start playing with them, it kind of like you get over the shock of, casting Morlock or
Yeah,
some Space Marine, and then you start to realize there's actually interesting game pieces here.
yeah,
So
yeah. The Universes Beyond is gonna. I think it's just gonna keep splintering. Like everyone has a line where they're like, "All right, no more," and I think maybe they're like testing it. I think that'll for a lot of people, it was like once the Iron Man, once I lose to Iron Man Ragavan, I'm like I'm out, you know. But it's like I don't know. SpongeBob is coming out soon, but I used to watch SpongeBob as a kid, so who knows? Maybe there's like a party bus or something, or you know, underwater pineapple that I can use as like a ratchet bomb or something. You know, like I try to be a little bit. Yeah, everyone has a different line, I think, for that for sure.
yeah, I mean, for me, the line was crossed years ago anyway. So at this point, it's
Yeah,
all
that's
kind of
right.
much of the same. Like Comet, we're playing with a space dog, and we've been playing with a space dog for a couple of years now. So I'm not sure that that's materially different from Iron Man.
Yeah, yeah. Thoughts on silver bordered cards? Probably not worth it. I think that we've seen that from a competitive standpoint. People who are playing for a long time don't really even want to play with the silver border cards. So probably releasing the rest of the silly ones in there won't work.
Yeah, I mean, stickers was obviously a mistake from the coast's
I miss
perspective.
stickers so much. I was like, I would just put a new sticker on my companion every time I went off with Last Voyage of the Yogurt. And I was like, well, I guess I'm putting this little haircut on my Yorion. And it was like, people were very annoyed. And I drew a lot of games because I somehow couldn't win a game, but I drew a lot of games. And yeah,
Well,
it's
I mean,
definitely,
I was one of those people who enjoyed bringing a sticker deck when I had no sticker cards.
yes,
Just
smart.
so you know,
It
I
was a,
personally didn't have a huge issue with them, but I still think it was a bit of a mistake
yeah,
to
yeah.
make them legal.
We have this funny anecdote in Canberra because one of our players was playing in an event and they uh, did register. They brought their sticker deck but didn't register the sticker cards, and so the argument of it's strictly better no matter what. Like your percentage points goes up even if it's by a fractional amount if you bring your stickers. Because what happens if you steal someone's Ragavan and then you steal their sticker card and then you don't have any stickers to use? But like we did find the actual downside, which was you can get you can get a game rule violation,
Registration error.
deck
That's so
registration
funny.
area. Yeah, exactly, because you've just incorrectly done this. So yeah, it's pretty funny. Pretty funny.
Yeah.
Wonderful. It seems like there's nothing else going on. Can't put his stickers on a rag if you don't own it. Exactly. So yeah, I think that's kind of where people sort of decided that yes, I will play a sticker deck in my sideboard, even though I'm not playing any sticker cards. Chifley, it's been an absolute pleasure talking about these recent tournament results with you. Chifley's in the Discord. If you ever want to reach out to him, pick his brains about his recent wins, and you know, from what I've seen from analyzing data over the last little while, that you win a lot. So it sounds like you're a good person to know if you're looking to win a game of Magic.
Oh, well, thank you. It's very kind of you to say. I think I've been running pretty well this year, particularly in the events where it really mattered. But I do enjoy the Highlander. So
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
wonderful. Going out the door, Kat says, what content is coming up for my channel? Expect to see this on later on youtube.com/CBRMTG. But in regards to what's coming up in the future, I think doing these is relatively easy and fits into my schedule and is of value. Tournament coverage, maybe, but none on the horizon. I really like that PoG did a little bit of streaming because like if you get out of it, it takes you a long time to get back in. So it was good to see that Jimbo was sort of back in the saddle producing content.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, and it was really cool, and it like makes a difference, I think. So I went to Canberra 4 because I was like, I want to play this time. You know, I'm healthy with my hobbies and my boundaries. This time I'll play. Next time I'll stream or whatever. And like just like went like 03 drop go home. So it's like not really worth it in the end. I think it probably would have been better if I just stayed and filmed the content, you know.
Yeah, I like the backpack stream trend in general in
Yeah.
Magic's.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great to see.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. So onwards and upwards, but yeah, Volti recent committee member has been posting a lot of content as well, and it's quite good. It gets me fired up as well for making content because I think that our community is really wonderful, and I think it's worth putting in this effort to show it. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I love watching your stuff and reading your stuff and reading Volties stuff. So
yeah.
definitely keep putting it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. You can find us, of course, at youtube.com/CBRMTG. If you're watching us now, that's on at twitch.tv/CBRMTG. You can find me in the Discord. My name is Angus. You can find Chifley in the Discord. Chifley is the name. Yeah, thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
See ya.